Okay, when people say post up, some people have been like, what does that mean? It means I celebrated. I stuck my arm in the air and put number 1 up in the air and like shook my fist. And like that's not my personality at all. You've been around me when I've been coaching like track teams that have won championships. You might get a like little fist pump out of me, but I probably will just sit there emotionless. Like That's kind of how I roll. And so I get done with this race and I'm just like, yeah, like screaming. And it had nothing to do with Eddie. The best part was I didn't even know his mom was pissed. And my friend, Kate Sandberg, came up to me right like 10, 15 minutes later. And she's like, his mom is so pissed. Now, Kate's the kind of person, she might have said it to me just to like wind me up.
Push a button.
100%. But she's like, his mom is so pissed. And so are a bunch of the other moms over there. They have 40-year-old man celebrated on their kid. What's up, everybody, and welcome back to the Stable Cyclist Podcast. I'm JP, your normal host, and today, back with us, my good buddy Aaron Haugen. And Aaron, we're here in your classroom, literally, because it's May. It's Mental Health Awareness Month, which is really what we're going to talk a lot about today. But May is also like a crazy busy time for you, and so this is how we could squeeze this in. How are you doing, man?
We're hanging in there. Yeah, before I came here, I was helping get the kids to bed, and they're like, you have another track meet tomorrow? I coach track, and it's like, yeah, it's our last week with 2 meets, and then we're into cutting time, and rosters get smaller, and we work towards a state meet hopefully, and school's done next week, so it all comes to a close, and it's chaos.
In the education and track world, it is a wild time. I lived that lifestyle for 18 years, 17 years, and I no longer do the track, but I miss certainly hanging out at meets and everything with you. But we're here today. It is our first Ask Me Anything episode, and I had thought a lot about when I hear podcast hosts do an Ask Me Anything, or in this case, Ask JP Anything episode, a lot of time the host will just host it by themselves and they read through the questions in a room by themselves. And I knew what the questions were going to be on this, because while the podcast is not exclusively about mental health, it's a lot of times where we go. I have been very open with my story in hopes of giving hope to other people, and in turn I knew we would get a lot of questions back, and we did. And so it seemed like a better conversation to have in person with a friend and somebody who kind of lived the experience with me and still lives it with me on a regular basis. And so, yeah, here we are. We got a page full of questions, and let's go, man.
All right, let's go. This is good. Yeah, the questions are awesome. There's a variety, and I just look forward to like next time already, just to see what people come up with.
One more thing. If you're watching this on YouTube and you're like, JP, you have like a regular mic setup and you got Aaron holding a mic. We had some technical difficulties. The plan was 100% that you were going to have a setup, and we are really working through some final kinks on in-person podcasts, because this summer I am going to start traveling more to go and hang out with people and be in person. And so we're getting that set up, dialed in, but obviously we still got a few kinks in the show, and so you're holding a mic like you're doing stand-up on a stage at the Doubletree in Fargo, and I get to have my normal mic. So anyways, away we go.
Yeah, it's all good. It's gonna work. All right, so we'll dive in. First question from WagJam27. In your last episode on YouTube, How Trainer Road Helped Save My Life, you mentioned that at the end of the race in 2021, you posted up on a 15-year-old for the victory, and then followed up and said that his mom is still probably pissed. What happened?
So there's definitely context more than that. And I didn't have time to dive into it in the episode. The Minnesota Mountain Bike Series is amazing. It is a series, it kicks off, I believe, this weekend down in Rochester, Minnesota. They do a great job. There's races all over the state through the entire summer. And one of the things that's really cool about it is that you have a ton of youth. And Bruce Martins, who runs the National Youth Development Center in Minneapolis, he recently shifted to a different job, but he'll stay in Minneapolis, and he's going to be a podcast guest in June, one of the in-person ones we're going to do. But Bruce has all these kids that race, and it is a developmental program, so these kids can hit. And, the fun of those kind of races for me is, most teenage boys can't climb very well. And so I could usually put a lot of time into them on climbs because that's my main strength. But on the downhills, they were just way superior technically. So all season I'd race these kids, and you get to know them. You stand around after a finish of a race and everybody has war stories from the race. And it doesn't matter if the kid is 15 or the dude is 60. You're all standing around. You all went through this together. It's really fun. And so I got to know this kid named Eddie Binsfield the whole summer. We raced against each other, and we threw haymakers all summer at each other. We get to late in the year, we get to the last race, and Eddie and I throw down for 8 laps of this short track race at Maple Lake. And I end up beating him. And it's a sprint finish. And I didn't, when people say post up, some people have been like, what does that mean? It means I celebrated. I stuck my arm in the air and put number 1 up in the air and shook my fist. And that's not my personality at all. You've been around me when I've been coaching track teams that have won championships. You might get a little fist pump out of me, but I probably will just sit there emotionless.
Right.
That's kind of how I roll. And so I get done with this race and I'm just yeah, screaming. And it had nothing to do with Eddie. And it was, as I did explain on the Trainer Road episode that just aired on YouTube, it was all about everything I'd overcome, specifically in that previous year. But, more than that, my whole life essentially of feeling this very weird, uncontrolled way with bipolar. And I had figured out, I'd kind of figured it out how to live with it through all the different management ways. And the victory over him was yeah, I did it. The best part was I didn't even know his mom was pissed. And my friend, Kate Sandberg, came up to me 10, 15 minutes later, and she's like, his mom is so pissed. Now, Kate's the kind of person, she might have said it to me just to wind me up.
Push a button.
100%. But she's like, his mom is so pissed, and so are a bunch of the other moms over there. They have 40-year-old man celebrated on their kid. But, I think it's a funny story. You can even hear people, there's video of it that Bruce sent me that he's filming, and as I throw the fists up to celebrate, you can hear all the younger kids be like, ugh. So that's the story.
Oh, okay. So you mentioned that, and that was early on in your mountain bike exposure, I imagine, was that summer. So that has to at least be part of it. But anyways, you mentioned in there that climbing was your strength, and there is, especially in the cycling world, there is old man strength. The peak performance for cycling is not at 17.
No.
And it's not at 22 either.
Although Tadej Pogačar is proving us all wrong on that.
True. But yeah, holy. So speaking of climbing, 09 Wald asks, why is it easier to put down Mad Watts up a climb than it is to do the same in a headwind?
Well, in the case of 09 Wald, you're just too little, buddy. I know 09 Wald. He's a good friend of mine. Yeah, he's a tiny guy. So, of course, he dominates on the climbs. And he's
just going to get blown all over the place.
Yeah, he can. And I am good at climbing, but I'm kind of a tweener. I'm not great at it like he is. But I can also, if we get in the crosswinds, I'm going to try and split him. So, yeah, it depends. And, the bigger, when you first get into cycling, you might think that everybody needs to be these tiny people. And then, the ex-hockey players show up at the group ride, and they, on the flat in the wind, will tear you to absolute pieces. And you look at them, and it doesn't make sense. And then equally, when you go uphill, it's like a stone.
Yeah, last summer was my first summer out at the Matahe, and to see, the body types, not everyone is a Schleck brother. And my exposure always was to road racing, and specifically like the European tours,
Yeah.
where the vast majority of anyone in contention with a GC is like 6'1", $130, and just like string beans and can just pull themselves up climbs and pull away. And so that makes sense for 09 Wald as well. Question 3 is not a question, just a comment. No questions. Just enjoying the podcast from Lost in Minneapolis.
I have a story about Lost in
Okay,
Minneapolis.
you got to share, and then I'll do a shameless plug for your podcast.
So, Lost in Minneapolis is a really badass lady named Holly that I met through the mountain bike scene. I think I've only met her once in person, and that's where the story takes place. It's my first mountain bike race, 2018 at Cuyuna, and I am in over my head. I'm in the best shape of my life. I'm really fit, but I'm not a mountain biker yet at this point. And we're both in the marathon category, so it's like, how far can you race in 4 hours? And she and I have been like leapfrogging each other all day, and it's kind of become like this game of like who can put the hurt on the other one and get far enough ahead. And late in the last lap, there's not a lot of climbing at Cuyuna, but where there is, I like went so deep that like my arms fell asleep. Which, like, all doctors, calm down. But, like, I went really deep, right? Yeah. And I got rid of her. And I was like, yeah. And at Cuyuna, you come down this long, snaky descent into the finish line. And I was like, I finally got away from her. I'm going to finish where I finish. And you go around, after the descent, you go around one last turn, and it's a finish line. And it's, like, so fast. And at the last second, I hear this free hub, like, catching up to behind me, and I hear this girl go, "Wee, I caught you." Zip around me, finish line, beat me. And I was just like, what? And that is the start of our mountain bike friendship, of just this like childlike glee catching me at the end of a race.
That's so good. So yeah, she enjoys the podcast. If for some reason somebody's coming to the podcast today for the first time, the guest variety has been amazing. Like, and all I listen to is podcasts. I listen to music in here, but other than that, like, really, I don't listen to music much anymore. But the podcast that released what is now last Friday, Dr. Sam Rockwater, was incredible. So if you haven't listened, like, he gets into like some technical and, for Americans, physical therapy type things or physio stuff for the rest of the world. But then also just gets into his life story. And yeah, it was so good. I don't know. I loved it. So good. Coming up next, Diane Joe asks, how do you find a therapist that specializes in working with athletes?
That is a great question. And I think it goes into the same thing. John Shirkey was a guest on the podcast a couple months ago now. John is he's a mental performance coach for Montana State University football team, but he's also a therapist, a psychologist, and he's out in Montana. But he talked about, like, you just got to ask your doctor. And I would say it really fits into the same category of anybody looking for a therapist. You know what you are, right? Like, for some people, religion's really important. So you want to find like a faith-based person. Or for some people, like, maybe they identify as LGBTQ and like they want to find somebody like that who they're more comfortable talking about those issues. And this isn't any different. Like, if athletics is an important thing for you, ask your doctor to help you start the process. John Shirkey also talked about Psychology Today as a good resource. I believe if you go there, you have to create your own profile, and then you can kind of search around, but they're going to have recommendations there too. And then the other thing is just ask people who you know who see a therapist and see what, you just, the big thing I've learned with all this, you have to be willing, if you really want help or you have a loved one who really needs help, you have to be willing to put yourself out there and seek it. And it's like the whole process. You got to do the work.
Absolutely. Let's go back a little ways here. Norski 4057 asks or mentions that he wants to hear more about your running days at MSUM And then eventually after that, what made you transition off of running into the bike?
Yeah. Oh, that's a lot there. The main thing is I did, and this comes up, you asked me, like, how did a fan know to ask this? And I said, well, there's reference to it in, there's an episode on YouTube after my mountain bike accident last summer, and the doctor who initially treated me, not my normal doctor, was very confused as to the extent of my accident and I guess my lifestyle. And she said that in the post, like when you read the notes after
the chart,
yeah. She said he is a ultra endurance trail runner and he was involved in a high-speed dirt bike accident.
Have you ever ran a trail run?
No, I have not. I have not.
Have you ridden dirt bike?
I have ridden on like a scooter.
Yeah, okay.
At my neighbor's. Yeah. My neighbor has a lot of dirt bikes, and one day we were like, everybody was going over to the campfire, and everybody was like, let JP ride a bike over there. And he like looked around the shop, and he's got like a lot of high power motos, and he just like pointed to this like smooth wheeled scooter, and he's like, I think that's probably the safest bet for you. So no, I have never ridden. Okay, all that to say, in that I talk about the last time I really ran was in college. And I believe I've talked a little bit about that I was a college runner. And I loved running. Like, and this came up in a conversation today, but I said, when I was 30 years old, I had spent 2/3 of my life identifying as a runner as my main sport. And people are like, you didn't start running when you were 10. Yes, I did. When I was 10 years old, my mom would be like, yo, you have way too much energy. You need to go run around. And so for a while, I'd like run around the yard. And then after a while, I was like, can I run down to the fire department and back? Or can I run over to the gas station and back? And this was like weekly. I would go out for like 2-3 mile runs when I was a little
hill
kid.
to climb too, coming back up.
It is. You know, we lived on the top of town basically. But yeah, so running was just like a huge part of my life. I have never talked a lot about, I was really small going through high school. My last name can lend itself to bullying. And then I didn't always know when to like not, talk smack back. And so there was a lot of, a lot of bullying I dealt with in high school, and I dealt with it by going to run. Because running was one of those things where like I was fully autonomous. Like, you can't touch me. And then I started having success, and it was just like, man, I love this. But, and I think for a long time it was, we talk about bipolar. It's not like you just like appear bipolar one day. Right. It has manifested over a long period of time. And I think for a long time, running helped me kind of bury it. Yeah. And
regulate.
Yeah. And self-regulate. And how did I get into biking? Okay, that's a great question. After college, I started doing the half marathon thing and was starting to transition to marathon distance. And I tore my plantar fascia in my left foot in the build up to that marathon. And when it healed, it didn't heal properly. And I saw a couple specialists, and they were like, look, how your foot healed, that's a genetic thing. Like, we can go in and fix it, but it's going to re-heal this way. And so like, it's time to find something else to do, which obviously was heartbreaking, but that
was a process too. That wasn't like one appointment and then 2 days later another appointment.
No, it was like 2 years of being injured.
Because you wore Crocs for like 4 years or something straight. And
yeah, when you would have been a high school student and I was first a teacher, where I teach and you went to high school, I was wearing Crocs for like 2 years straight. But yeah, eventually I found the bike, and part of it was like the tour was fun to watch, and people, Lance Armstrong, we're not supposed to say his name. I don't care. Like, what he did like influenced me to feel like biking was cool. And so when I couldn't run, it was like, I'm going to go bike. And that's, then it's just this like never ending wormhole you fall down. So that's kind of the transition. And I know you like probably have more questions for me about all of it.
There's so much, yeah. Like you have talked about, I should say, like when we've just been sitting around talking like at MSU, I'm like, in the cross country track world that you were living in, like you guys just piled miles on and like piled miles and quickly discovered, which now in 2024 is we know more or we aren't college kids anymore, however you want to say that. But like we talk about like trying to push kids. Like I have the conversation once a week probably of like, how do you tap your genetic ceiling?
Yeah. And
like as a high school kid, you'll never do it. But like we're going to do our best, and like sleep and nutrition and that stuff goes into that, and training obviously. And I don't think you can tell stories, but like I don't think your nutrition was going to get there at the time, at least.
It was not. No, we did. It was a high mileage program, and partly self-induced. You know, I
part of regulating, probably not that
Yeah.
you knew that at the time, but like that was when you feel like this is where I'm normal, for lack of a better word.
So, yeah, we were anywhere between like 80 to 95 miles a week.
120 kilometers.
Yeah. Ooh, look at you. Bringing in, making sure our non-American listeners. Yeah, it was a big amount. And partly because of when practice fell in our schedule, like in our day, the dining options on campus were not great at that time when we finished practice. And so the nutrition was not optimal. I'll just say that. And, you know, it kind of points to my junior year. I only ran through my junior year. And the reason is my junior year, I had a femoral stress fracture, which is like a stress fracture in my femur up at the head where it goes into your hip socket. It was awful, the pain. It was no sleep for a couple months because you have so much night pain with that injury. And I often look back at how poor our diets were, and I'm like, that probably helped contribute to it. And then it probably wasn't the best how much we ran, and then just stupid stuff too. Like I've told you, we would come if we had a meet in the cities. Krispy Kreme donuts was like the thing in Maple Grove, and we would stop on the way home, and like literally every guy on the cross country team would stop and get a dozen, and we'd eat them by the time we got back to Fargo 3 hours later, like empty box. Next morning we'd wake up at like 6 in the morning,
go for 10,
and then feel fantastic, you know. So it's just like the furnace burns really hot when you're doing that much work, but we know now, especially like if you can optimally fuel your body in any circumstance, but especially when you're stressing it that much, it's going to perform better. It's going to adapt better.
Yeah, if it doesn't have to work to put with the food that you're putting into it, and it can just work for the actual training.
Correct.
It goes a long ways. Tying into that, the rumor is that you're running more lately. Is that true?
I am, as much as I can. And part of it's been, I've really only been exercising for like 3 weeks. And people are going to be like, you host a YouTube channel about biking and you've only exercised for 3 weeks. I've been laid up with this concussion garbage for a long time, almost 9 months. Started working with a new team around the 1st of May, and they really have pushed me hard, and we're seeing a ton of progress. And this is the best I've felt since before the accident. There's still days where I have headaches, but it's not like what it was. I can read off of a book now in class and walk around the room and not be like, oh, I'm going to pass out. But part of that has been like, I can't bike every day because like I just have no core strength. And so early on I was starting to get injured, or have those pains where like, whoa, something's wrong. So I've been mixing it up. And when we like say running, it's very loose. Like I run for like a minute and a half, and then I walk for a minute and a half, and then I have these like vestibular concussion exercises that I have to do. And so like yesterday, my kids are at piano practice or piano lessons, and I'm out on some gravel road doing like burpees with turns in the middle of the road in the Earhart Hills, and then like trotting along and doing the next thing. And yeah, I am running. And like I said before, like running was such a huge part of my life that when I start to do it at all, even a little bit, all of a sudden I'm like, speaking of trail running, that Mahache 50 starts to look pretty awesome. And so I texted you, and I texted a couple of other friends, and my friend Jamie, who you will get to meet at some point this summer on the show, calls me immediately. I said, I've only been running 3 weeks, but I start to think I need to go do this. And he's freaking out because he thinks I'm on like a manic bender.
Yes.
And he's just like, dude, are you okay? Like, what are you trying to spend money right now? Like, and I'm like, no, Jamie, like, chill, man. Like, I've run a lot my whole life. It feels like freedom to me, and I'm getting to do it again. And yeah, maybe I will go like run, walk one of these things someday, but it's no time soon. But I really am enjoying just being out there again.
Yeah, it's a whole different world. So speaking of what Jamie was concerned with, but next question on the list is, how are you doing right now with your treatment plan? Obviously recovering from concussion stuff, and then combining that with everything else that's gone on the last few years here.
Yeah. Day to day, I'm doing really well. I have a set of management tools, I guess we'd call them, that really help me keep on track and really help me get through my day when it's hard. I will be totally honest that like this winter was the most I have struggled with depression since before I was diagnosed. It was really hard. And I know a lot of people are going to be like, bro, you put content out like the whole winter. You're just churning it out. And yeah, I did. But that's a big part of my treatment plan these days, and is to have these goals or these projects or these hobbies that really keep me, checking the boxes every day. And it doesn't mean it's not hard. It doesn't mean it's really hard, but I think that's sometimes where we get lost in the weeds of a mental health diagnosis or whatever, is that we think, well, oh, you're down in your low area is shut down. And it's like, no, you got to fight. Like, you got all these tools to help you fight and to help you like work your way back up. And it might take a really long time because you're also dealing with post-concussion syndrome and your brain doesn't work right. And you get really easily frustrated with stuff like, man, I can't remember anybody's name anymore. And that has now returned where I can remember people most of the time. But it was a hard winter. But just in general, I look at my manageability of my day-to-day. It's on a whole different level than it was 4 years ago. So
yeah. So like that's when you talk about the curves, like if this is the curve, like a really deep curve, like with your treatment plan, like we're trying to make it as shallow as we can, and like then we're back up to regulation. And
yeah, and that's when I was first diagnosed. One of the first conversations I had with my psychiatrist, the guy who diagnosed me, who continues to be my doctor, he said that this will never go away. This is for the rest of your life. All we're trying to do right now is take the roller coaster and get it to be more like a train track. And he's like, we can't get it to be a train track ever. Like it won't, but like the closer we can get it to that, the more normal your life is going to feel. Right. And that's the goal here. That's what management is.
Yeah, for sure. So Woody Kramer asks, how have you managed family life during your dark time, like leading up to the diagnosis and then into today?
So those are two very different answers.
That's probably a good thing.
Yeah,
there's more of a plan and stuff now a few years into this than there was on day one.
And a very patient wife at the center of all of it. Yeah, I've had a few people text me and ask when my wife is ever going to be on the podcast. She will never be on the podcast. Not because she's a snuffleupagus and doesn't exist.
She's real.
She's real. But in my decision like 2 years ago, when we first started making the documentary and then decided to do this channel and then decided to do this podcast, I kind of drew a line in the sand that I'm going to let you have all of me. And you being the listener, the watcher. I'm going to let you have all of my mental health story, but I'm going to keep my family. Like they are mine. And I need something that, like, as I like bare my soul to everybody, I still got something that I can go back to and be like, no, like I this is my space, you know? And at the same time, like, you know, my oldest kid is running the show here today, nice. Running the switcher and traveling with me. And my kids do stuff with me. And 100% will I answer this question? Yeah. But it begins and ends really with my wife and how amazing she is and how patient she is. I was talking with a coworker today about this question. And your dad used to work with me. And this coworker told me about a conversation between him and your dad where they said, I can't believe she deals with him. And this was before I was got treatment, before I was diagnosed. Right. I was just like wild, right? Yep. And your dad and this coworker were like, I don't understand. My wife would not put up with this. Right? Your mom would not have put up with this. No. And so my wife is amazing, incredibly patient, an incredible mom to our kids. And that allowed us, you know, people are like, well, how amazing is she? And I'm like, she lived with me for 10 years untreated bipolar, and we are still married. That's how amazing she is.
Oh, there's so many stories of like, now looking back, we're like, oh my, like what were we thinking? But like, where you would be like in a literal dark spot because you'd be in the basement for like 9 days.
Yeah.
And like handing out track workouts to like state athletes and being like, here you go, and back to sleep. Or
yeah.
Like, it's just, John's sick again.
Yeah.
Like, but we didn't know. We should have.
Yeah.
We didn't.
Yeah. And those dark times, you know, you talk about coming to the basement and I'm like, I'm not functional.
Yeah,
like,
just a shell.
I'm literally not functional. Yeah. Either laying in bed or laying on a couch for weeks at a time in heavy depression. Obviously now we know, but you know, what was my interaction with my family during those times? It didn't exist. Yeah. It did not exist. The kids just thought I was sick. If they were really young, they might come and snuggle by me. Yeah. I have a very special relationship with my youngest because during my crash in 2020 that got me diagnosed eventually, she would just lay on the couch or lay in a bed next to me and hold my hand and tell me like, it's going to be okay. You're going to get better. Like to have like a 3 or 4 year old tell you that, right? You know, oh, Dad, we need to go for a walk. You know, and we go walk.
Empathy that
yeah,
she
like
could show.
Yeah. And so, was I present? No, not at all. And I think there's a lot of shame that can be felt in that, especially if you have a spouse that is not understanding. And I also don't want it to sound like my wife is perfect and was totally understanding and was just like, oh, you go get healthy, boy. Like,
right.
I can remember telling her after I had been diagnosed, and I think there was still a vibe of like, we don't really know what's wrong, like understand what this means. Yeah. And I remember telling her, I've been suicidal for 9 years every day. Like, I thought about crashing the car on the way home every day.
Right.
Like, half a mile from the house. You know, and like, what? Of course, how did she react? Terrified, angry. Like, what do you mean you wanted to crash the car right before you got here?
Look at us.
Yeah.
Like you have us.
You were coming to us. And so, but she worked really hard to just like, okay, we're going to be patient. We're going to get through this. And she also worked really hard to not say things that were going to like be hard for me to, in that state, understand. She waited till like I had come good or good enough that we could have real conversations. Cause when you're in those low points, your ability to process is really crappy. And so, and then like talking about today, I would say the relationship, you know, I just told you like, this is the worst winter I've had in 4 years. The difference is, and I'm like, spoiler, Sunday, I'm going to release an episode on journaling. And like the sports tie-in, like we journal all the time. Like we don't think twice of, I did all my VO2 work and it was awesome, right? But the reality is we do all this journaling, and I didn't want to do journaling at first, but journaling has really helped me track things. And like when I get in those low points, it reminds me, did I go hang out with my kids today? Did I do a good job of this? Did I honor them even though I feel like crap? Was I present? And having those things that every day I go through in my journal and I think about, and I like, I had a bad interaction. I need to talk to them. That has really helped me versus just being like totally shut off from them and like, well, I'm a living body in your presence.
Right. It's
so
a much more conscious way of living.
Yeah.
Which is,
for sure.
All right. Amy Verlenich asks, and kind of in the same vein here, but how have you discussed your diagnosis with your kids considering their ages? And not that we're going to tell ages, but there's an age gap between your oldest and your youngest. So that has that changed how you discuss things? Yeah.
I have 5 kids, and it's a 9-year spread. Yeah. There you go. We'll blame it on the concussion. That's a good question. And I'm really thankful. And I talked about this in the podcast episode with my sister. We talked about that we were brought up in a house where talking about mental health was a norm. So we always talked about it. And
this wasn't like 4 years ago either. Like
no, this is
like
when I was 4.
Right, exactly. Like
yeah,
that's awesome.
Yeah, and we were raised in a system with our family, whether it was conscious or not. We were just going to talk about it. We were also raised in the era of Mr. Rogers, and Mr. Rogers, to this day, is one of my heroes for how he honored children, for how he talked to children about difficult things. I think about the message he gave on TV after 9/11 to little kids to try and help them understand what had happened in a way that wasn't inflammatory to anyone.
Right.
It was amazing. And so I have always tried to honor not just my own kids, but any kid in a way that, like, I'm going to talk to you in a way that we can talk about
as a person.
As a person, we can talk about anything. It doesn't mean I'm going to give you all the details. Like my sister said, we knew somebody was in the hospital. We didn't always know why they were in the hospital. Right. And we might be told they were having a real hard time and they were sad, but we didn't learn the details till later. So how did I talk to my kids? I remember that initially trying to explain as simply as possible that my emotions were very hard to control, and not like I got angry quickly or that, but like that if I got excited, I might stay excited for 3 weeks.
Right.
And I might not sleep. And little kids can understand, boy, if you don't sleep, little kids are told all the time, you got to go to sleep so you're ready for school tomorrow or whatever, or grow up big and strong, and you don't sleep for 3 weeks. That's going to be a problem, or if I would tell them I might have so much energy, I don't want to eat for a week. Which that's paradoxical, and they're like, well, that, they can immediately identify, well, that would be bad, Yeah. And then they had seen, I didn't have to explain the bad, the down. They'd seen it. Hey, when Dad went and slept in the basement for 2 weeks and we only saw him when he came out to go to the bathroom, that's what depression looks like. We didn't really have to talk about it. I remember a very specific, so that was early. And then I remember a very specific conversation that winter. And I know that my oldest, who's running the switcher, will nod her head to this story. But I remember somebody at our dinner table said, that person's acting like a maniac. Mm-hmm. And, it was really hard to not lose it. And that was when I finally talked to them about mania.
Right.
Like this
maniacal behavior.
Yeah, like don't. I think I said, but we shouldn't really use that word. It's not really appropriate, because like when I feel that way, I don't feel safe anymore, because I don't trust my behaviors, and I act in a bad way, or I can act in a bad way, and so it was just like, it was never like an initial sit down when I came back from clinic or whatever and be like, well, Dad has it was just
family meeting.
Yeah, we did not have a family meeting about it. It was just as it came about, we talked about it. And then I tried to be, and I don't know that I was always good at this. I may have failed at sounding this way, but I just tried to be empathetic. If something came up, if we heard somebody talking about, oh, I have OCD because I like my closet to be in order on a TV show, then I'd be like, okay, time out. Like, I don't have OCD, but that person doesn't either.
Right.
And just building empathy for those in the mental health world and what they go through, even if we don't understand it. And kids will understand things if you are willing to talk about it in a safe manner with them. So hopefully that answers the question.
No, absolutely. Lindsay Inzi asks, in the midst of your mental health ups and downs, what have been some of the most helpful things your community, family, friends, medical providers, etc., have done or said to help you?
That is a great question, because this story was very unique in that you and I were talking about this a little bit the other day. Everything that happened with me took place in the pandemic. And so, like, our families were not getting together to just hang out. So everything was through text. Everything was through phone calls sometimes. There was no way we were doing a lot of stuff because it wasn't an option. Yeah. Things that people said. I think, and I talked about this in the Trainer Road episode Sunday, my primary care doctor, Sarah Winter, the best thing she told me on the front was, I need you to forever forget that you ever were a college athlete.
Right. Because
I was really worried, like, I'm not going to I can't exercise. Like, I feel so terrible. Yeah. And I legit did. I felt terrible. But she was just like, I need you to forget that you were ever a college athlete, and I need you to just concentrate on right now what we're doing. And it's the mistake that I hear so many people make with people who are struggling, especially with depression. People who have, in my experience, people who are manic, you're not going to reason with them. Beth tells a great story in the podcast. She doesn't say it's me, but she says, like, well, I'm sorry you feel this way and that you're like this and stressed out. Like, that was an actual conversation from 2015 where I was kind of freaking out. I was definitely manic, and she was trying to talk me down, and I wasn't having it. Like, most people are not going to have it when they're manic, but a lot of people are depressed that don't have bipolar. And when we interact with them, we have to talk to them in a way that, like, encourages them to move forward. Mm-hmm. Because so much of the time they get stuck. And obviously, like, who are the important people? Well, obviously my wife. Mm-hmm. One of the best things, I don't say this because we're sitting in a school. I have no clue if any of my administrators listen to this. I do not care. The administrators at the time, in 2020, when the pandemic started, I went off the grid for 10 weeks. And I basically did not show up at school. I didn't show up at school the rest of the year. I didn't really show up virtually. And in all reality, I should have lost my job. And because of COVID, I didn't, right? Because it was just like chaos in the education world. And then when I came back in the fall, I we go on this wild run with the soccer team. In the middle of it, I fall apart and I disappear again. No. When I came back, I wasn't thrust back into the classroom immediately. I was actually just a soccer coach for 2 weeks, I believe. Yeah. And then, and this was all discussed. And they said, we think that soccer is the most life-giving thing to you right now. Why don't you just do that? So I coached soccer for 2 weeks. And then I started doing half days. Like I'd come in at noon, teach for 3 hours.
Soccer.
Then coach soccer. And then almost like the last week of the season or right after the season got done, I came back full time, and I happened to have a student teacher coming the next week. And so once that student teacher got there, they had already done the first half of the semester somewhere else, so they were ready to start full time right now.
Right.
I went and sat at the back of the classroom like comatose zombie the rest of the, till I was good to go. Come January after the Christmas break, I was good to go.
Back.
And so that was huge, right? To have support in my administrative team that was just like, oh, this guy is a giant mess, and how do we get him going? And you guys were obviously hugely pivotal. Your brother Matthew is a doctor, hugely pivotal in being able to just talk me through things. But it was hard because it was like so isolating.
Right.
Due to the pandemic, and even in the school, like we were all eating by ourselves every day at lunch in order to like
survive.
To survive, right?
Stay at work and keep playing soccer or whatever. Yeah. The community around us is important. I
mean, what is your I guess you're one of the people on that list, right? Like how did you feel through all that?
It's so interesting because I don't know. Kelsey and I, my wife and I, talk about this quite a bit. Like, when you get a text, like, how do you read it? Like, I'm really struggling right now. Okay. Like, I have athletes tell me I'm really struggling right now all the time. Does that mean you're injured? Does that mean you're out of shape? Or you didn't sleep last night? Or, like, maybe there's a mental health issue going on. Like, what does that mean? And so, like, or like, if you get the text that says, okay, like, I mean, high schoolers are notorious for this, but like, they're just going to, Mr. Haugen, you need to read this. Like, this is the worst. And I was like, what if it just means okay? Like, this time. But anyway, so how you interpret texts, like, that just depends on how you're going to read into things. And like, typically there's opposite people in a marriage, and so like I'll just read something and be like, that is face value, and my wife will think about it all the ways that she can, which is a strength.
End of the world.
Right, which is a strength for her.
Yeah, for sure.
And a weakness for me, and then other times it's a strength for me and a weakness for her. And so like when we first heard like, okay, like John's diagnosed with bipolar, like there's not like a real world example. There, like, you can't even think of like movies where you're like, oh, that makes sense. And then we had a family member, not you, a different family member that eventually got diagnosed bipolar, and kind of the same thing. Like you think back and you're like, he lived with us for, I don't know, a semester, probably a college semester. And so when he was living with us, like every once in a while, it's like, man, he's just a little off today. And it like when you're living with somebody, but also like he kind of has his own life off on the side, like we'd only noticed it when he was on the manic side, because all of a sudden he's all up in your business and like asking, like, it's like, man, he asked like 78 questions today. What about this? And what about this? I have this idea and this idea and this idea. And it's like, okay, just take a deep breath. I answer him like, all right. And then like his mom would be texting like, all right, I think he's going to get seen by this person. And then, a different episode of some sort would happen. And so then we had that experience, and that all combined with it. And when I got to live with him while he was going through some of that, I was like, oh boy, like this is like, now I have what John was going through. And like on the dark time side of things that we've talked about tonight, like those are obvious, but also like it also should have been obvious when you could stay up for 2 weeks and write your soccer Bible.
Right. Like
it's this massive booklet that like with like the depth of study, and I don't know if we've talked about this. This is good. So my first year coaching track was 10 years ago, which is a little scary. But I just remember thinking like, I can't work as hard as he can. And like with the detail, and like I have thousands of videos on my computer saved that I will refer to at times, but never have I watched all of them. And they're all kinds of different events, all kinds of different like physio type training and weight training stuff, everything. And at certain points in your life, you would have gone through all of them. You would have had them cataloged and like organized, and like, which now you like don't trust yourself at that point. And at that point, you're like, this is kind of sweet. Like we can do a lot.
Yeah. Well, then I would have looked at you at that time and been like, dude, you're lazy.
Yes.
That's why you can't work as hard as me.
Yes.
And that was, for me, that was the biggest struggle all the way through. I think honest conversations were really important. Yeah. You know, when we think about Lindsay Yinzi's question, honest conversations were really important.
Yeah.
And my sister, when she called me after I had ended up in clinic and I was like a mess, she didn't like scold me, but she just told me, she's like, you think everybody's lazy.
Yeah.
But the problem is you're not normal. Like everybody's normal. You're not. And like you need to get help, because it's good to work hard, but like what you're doing is like you're not working hard.
Right.
It's not healthy.
No.
And the other thing, you know, when I think about this question and like its relevance, sharing our stories, like this is why I do this.
No. So
that other people have a reference point.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean I'm the definitive. Like I forgot to do the thing at the beginning, like, hey, this is disclaimer. Like this is not medical advice. Right. This is not medical. This is my story.
Not a doctor of anything.
However, so many people just totally keep it to themselves. Mm-hmm. They're like, oh man, I don't want to. Like, what do people think of me if I hear? And I'm like, you might prevent someone from killing themselves if they know your story, and they know the most influential conversation. I thought I had forgotten it earlier. I remembered it while you were talking. The most influential conversation I had, and it resonated. It is why I am not coaching track anymore. A really, really close friend of mine from high school, who I had not seen in person in 10 years, came back to our hometown to visit us. And this was the summer of 2021. So I'm starting to get my feet back under me. I'm starting to race my mountain bike against Eddie Binsfield. And my friend calls me and says, I'm going to be in town. I think we should get tea and go hang out. And I was like, well, okay. Sweet, man. I haven't seen you forever. I like what he's doing professionally is like so dope. But I don't want to reveal that because like it's his story to tell, right? But we're catching up, and I start telling him about what happened, and I get done telling him, and he just looked at me and he goes, I have bipolar disorder. And I never talk about it because I don't know how. And he goes, but I'll tell you, because he's like, and this is like one of my best friends in high school, right? And like we were like this, like so tight all the time. We were always in step, and it's like, yeah, no kidding, we were always in step, like. Like we were probably like riding the wave together. But what he said to me, and it just rattled me so hard because everybody was coming to me at that time. Like no context. I have this diagnosis. Nobody knows what to do with me. Everybody kept saying, well, surely you're going to have to quit doing all these things you're doing. And it was driving me nuts. And I had just finished a really successful track season. It was the last I got to coach with your dad. And this friend just said to me, he said, don't quit anything right now. That's what I'll tell you to do. And I was like, what? And he's like, your management and the disorder itself will tell you what you can't do anymore. or what you need to go do.
Right.
And I was like, okay. So I didn't quit anything at the time.
Right.
6 months later, I was like, yeah, it's track I got to set down.
The chopping block.
I'm really sorry. Like, this is like, running is my life, right? Running is my life. And like, we had all these really good teams. And these kids that I cared so much about them.
The community behind it. All of it. It's such a different sport. Like, you're competing with people, but it's not really against, except maybe in the occasional distance race. But
case in point, 2019, we're racing literally against each other in the finals at state. Yes. We win, and you are celebrating next to me. Yes. Like, this is so amazing, right? Like, it's just a different.
We set a school record in the same race, I'm pretty sure, and you guys won state, and I was so excited.
Yeah, so it was this thing I loved, and ultimately, my friend had said, just chill out, get your management plan, your everything going under control, your toolbox built, you'll know what you got to set down. And I set track down, and I miss it once in a while, especially if we were having youth soccer practice next to the field or next to the track this year, and one of the sprinters went by. And my brain, my calculating brain kicks in front side rotation isn't very good there. We got to fix that. But that person's got a lot of potential. And it kicked back in. But you figure out what you need to set down. And it's not always the best to just throw it all in the air, because you need some stability. And that's really what my friend was trying to communicate. We need that stability in our lives that we already have. And then we'll kind of figure out I can't balance this, or I need to go do this, like what we're doing here. Yeah. This has filled a huge void, a creative void that I need to fill on a regular basis. This is part of the management plan, like I said earlier. So, yeah, and I'm just grateful for that conversation. And it's why I think about maybe I'm the only person that he talked to that he has bipolar, but it got me to start speaking. And it's why I want to encourage other people who are struggling. You don't got to air it on social media. You don't got to start a YouTube channel. But
have some conversations.
Have some conversations when it's available. Build that empathy, because it's not just about we got to give everybody a safe space. It's okay, well, how do we work through this?
Yeah, and we obviously, as COVID wound down is the right word, but obviously our family started getting back together. And then we're able to have some, especially in person. FaceTime is great, but it's still not the same. And I think our families got together once, I don't know dates, and then it was kind of another 3 months or something. And then we got together again, and I think we texted, I probably wasn't home yet driving, which is 20 miles. And you had texted already, I kind of forgot, how good it is to get together with people. And it's oh yeah, that it and then you get to have those conversations because you need to. And I was talking with my wife last night, some of these conversations, your kids have to hear.
Yeah.
And we had talked about doing this in my basement, and we still might sometime this summer, who knows what happens. But that's what I told her last night. There's value in my kids go to bed, but they might lay up and listen to us talk about this stuff, and that would be great.
Yeah, for sure.
And maybe they'll go back on YouTube someday and watch it too, but I don't know. I'm their dad. They probably won't. It's not
exactly.
that cool.
No, but the need for not just the first conversation. After a diagnosis, it's the continual conversation, because guess what the whole first conversation is? Wow. Look at this absolute implosion I had. Let me tell you all about it. I still remember just how gobsmacked your wife was as I explained what these breakdowns looked like. And I didn't sleep for 3 weeks. And the last week of those 3, I didn't eat anything.
She's hitting us what? You guys didn't recognize this?
Yeah. And so the whole first conversation was with that. And you guys left the first time, and I was oh my gosh, that was exhausting to tell that whole story. But the second time, we didn't have to talk about that. Yeah. We got to just talk about being friends and the things going on in our lives. And I could just listen. I didn't have to be the person telling the story. Yeah. And so, and then from there, the conversations just grow, and the comfort and the support grows, because you just feel more comfortable. So, yeah. That was a deep dive there for like 45 minutes.
No, it's good. It's good. All right, let's finish. This is a fun one. One movie and one book that you are excited about right now.
Oh, boy. Do you have one and one?
I've got, well, okay. We're going to take movie in a broad term. I love documentaries. This is such a cop-out because I'm not going to say Mata. But like, I could sit and watch documentaries every night.
Yeah.
And like topics all over the spectrum. And so, you know the Barkley Marathon?
Yeah. Do I know the Barkley
good.
Marathon?
You're a runner.
Come on.
You're a runner.
I was texting with Sam Rockwater, last week's guest, yesterday about running, right?
Yeah.
And he's just like, I'm like, man, my foot wouldn't let me do that. If my foot were healthy, I would have already done like Badwater, and I listed off like a bunch. And I'm like, and I would have tried to get into Barclays and probably died.
Yep.
And he just thought that was so funny. So yes, I know what Barkley Marathon is. If you don't know what Barkley's Marathon is, like just type it into YouTube, and like there's gonna be like 8 amazing documentaries that come up, and every single one of them you're gonna like, at least once in the movie you're gonna be like, what?
Yeah.
So
okay.
Anyway.
We watched. I was going to watch Where Dreams Go to Die. It's on YouTube. Go watch it. So good. It's an hour, and it's fast. And my wife was working on something on the couch, sitting next to me, and probably like 10 minutes in, she hadn't she was supposed to be writing stuff, and she hadn't written anything, and then the pen was down, and then she said, "You got to be joking me!" She doesn't have the fascination as much with the endurance world. Definitely not with the climbing world if we get into that stuff that I have, but with storytelling, like she's locked in.
Yeah.
And it's amazing. So I watched that probably a couple weeks ago, and you had recommended it, which I actually forgot about.
Yeah.
I asked, I bet 5 or 6 people before I finally texted one of our group chats and was like, which one of you guys recommended this? Because I just watched it, and it's incredible. So that's my quote unquote movie right now. I love movies. I watch like 5 a year, and I break them up into like TV show style because I fall asleep at night. So that's my movie right now.
Right on. You got a book? Or is it my turn with the movie first?
You go with movie. I'll get a book.
All right. I don't think it's a movie. It's a documentary. What? Like, this is what I do. Literally, when I'm not teaching, I do this. And, we talked earlier today when I came in, and I'm like, yeah, dude, I worked on the spreadsheet for where you and our other cameramen are going to shoot, for the Matahe this year. And it's what I think about a lot. So I really like Arctic Ascent. It's on Disney Plus.
Yeah.
It's the newest Alex Honnold. I say film, but it's 3 episodes. I watched that solely from a cinematographer perspective.
Creative standpoint. Yeah.
And
sure.
I happen to also be in a documentary cinematography class right now online. And the guy who is the main DP for that film has a big section of the class I'm in. So it's all on outdoor adventure documentary stuff, which is like, that's our jam, right?
Yeah.
That's what we do. So that's what I'm really into. Plus, I just marvel at Alex Honnold, and I'm just like, oh, dude, you are
so talented.
You are so talented and an interesting cat, to say the least.
Yeah, the psychology side of just listening to him process information is so. Yeah, they got to watch it because they go through a phase of like, are we going to keep climbing, or are we not going to climb? And the conversation that surrounds that with like the most experienced climbers, some not experienced climbers, and then like a couple like ice experts, for lack of a better word. It's like, what? The conversation is wide ranging. It's so good. Yeah. Man, Arctic Ascent. Okay, book. I read it a little bit ago. It's probably been 6 weeks or something. I can read right now, so this is going to be a tough question for you.
Oh, I have an answer though.
Okay, good. But somebody we both do not know, but know Sally Jenkins wrote a book, The Right Call, and she is so good. And the takeaway, the book essentially is like, I don't know, 8 to 10 of like the best of the best of the best in the sports world. And not just like NBA, NFL guys. There's a couple of those, but like all wide ranging sports. And just like, how did you do it? And like, how do you train to get to the point where like in crunch time, you are making the right call, that you are doing X, Y, and Z and the processes that you've set up. And it's so good from a life standpoint, from a sports standpoint. Like, she did a fantastic job.
Awesome. Yeah, my book right now is one that I'm revisiting in audio form. And it is a book I read back in 2017 or maybe 2016 when it came out. It's Turtles All the Way Down by John Green. It either came out recently or is coming out as a movie. And the reason I'm revisiting it, I left tea leaves along the way from like around 2010 to 2020. But that book was the first time, and like I don't have OCD, right? No. John Green, amazing author, has OCD himself, didn't ever know how to talk about it, so he wrote a fictional book, and the character basically like lives out how he thinks. It's a really well-written story, and there were a couple times in there, I don't have OCD, but how he described how this main character felt was the first time I was like, I think there might be something wrong with me, because I've felt this way. Like, I don't feel this way right now, but I have felt that, like, there's an experience in the book that's like very intense, and as it is described is how I feel when I have mania. And it's kind of a scary, intense experience. And I just remember reading that back then, whenever it was, and being like, well, that's interesting. And now, like, and I love John Green. He's also very outspoken about mental health, although, you know, he's on a way huger scale than what I am doing. And as he will also attribute, it can be exhausting when you have to do it publicly. This is safe, right? This feels pretty safe. When I make episodes, it's pretty safe. When I'm speaking in northern Minnesota in front of like a packed auditorium, that's exhausting, because you know, it's a lot of the same content, but you have people there, and then they want your attention afterwards, which is more exhausting. So yeah, it's a great book. I would recommend going out and getting the audiobook or reading it just to have a better understanding. And then if you're one of those people, it's like, I have OCD, go read that book and you'll be like, I do not have OCD. I never have. There's nothing about me that has it. Or maybe you will. Maybe you'll feel like you do. So
look in a mirror.
Yeah. But Aaron, this has been incredible. Thank you for doing this. I look forward to doing this more. We'll be back potentially in this building, but maybe somewhere else in July for a non-cycling related conversation, but a really heavy conversation, I know, with one of our good friends. Yeah. And we will also be here, I believe, for another Ask Me Anything, probably in July, because I think June is filling up with regular guests. So
that's good. Yeah, that's good. Save up the questions. That's fun.
And that's just it. Is if you do have more questions, or you are interested in, you know, finding something out, or if you watch an episode and you see it, send me a DM on Instagram, or you can email us at thestablecyclist@gmail.com, or you can, I think, is that all of them? Or you can leave a comment on YouTube, but people don't always like to do that because it's very public. But the other ways are a great way to get to us. And yeah, thank you so much for listening. No ads today. People know what I'm going to say anyway with ads, but no ads today. It has been awesome being here. And as always, remember, you are loved.